On July 19, 1848, people walked into the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls, New York, for a meeting that sounded almost too broad to be respectable, a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of woman. The unresolved question in that room was direct. Could a republic built on declarations of liberty keep treating women as dependents in law, education, church life, wages, marriage, and politics? Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Frederick Douglass, and local reformers did not yet know that later generations would call this a beginning. They knew that speaking aloud could cost them reputation, friendships, and peace at home. The convention did not appear from nowhere. Before Seneca Falls, reform networks had been teaching people how to organize, argue, print, petition, and endure ridicule. Abolition meetings, Quaker gatherings, temperance work, and anti-slavery newspapers created a world where women could sometimes speak, write, raise money, and make moral claims in public. Yet even inside reform movements, women often met a boundary. They could support justice, but not always lead it. They could be praised for conscience, but told that public authority belonged to men. Lucretia Mott carried that contradiction with particular force. She was already known as a Quaker minister and abolitionist, a woman who could reason calmly in hostile rooms. Elizabeth Cady Stanton carried a different but connected anger. In homes, courts, and churches, she saw how a married woman's legal identity could be folded into her husband's power, how property and wages could be controlled, how divorce and custody laws could trap families, and how custom could make dependence look natural. Because those pressures touched kitchens, parlors, churches, schoolrooms, and courthouses, the convention had to make private life public. The immediate spark came through conversations in Waterloo and Seneca Falls among Stanton, Mott, Martha Coffin Wright, Mary Ann McClintock, Jane Hunt, and others. That detail matters because movements often begin around tables before they appear on platforms. A newspaper notice invited women to meet and discuss rights. The notice was short, but the step was large. It announced that grievances usually softened into complaint would be organized into public debate. Once neighbors could walk into the chapel and hear the claims, the old arrangement had to defend itself. Inside the Wesleyan Chapel, the organizers presented what became the Declaration of Sentiments. Its strategy was bold because it used the familiar architecture of the Declaration of Independence. That borrowed form was not decoration. It forced listeners to compare American language with American practice. When the text declared that all men and women are created equal, it did more than add two words. It changed the measuring stick. If rights came from human equality, then custom, marriage law, church discipline, and political exclusion all required evidence, not habit. The listed grievances were concrete because the injuries were concrete. Marriage law affected property, wages, children, debt, and personal safety. Limited education narrowed work and confidence. Exclusion from professions and public office turned talent into dependence. Religious restrictions could turn conscience into obedience. Political exclusion meant that women were governed by laws they had no formal part in making. The convention's power came from linking these pieces. It said that a woman's situation was not a series of isolated inconveniences. It was a system, and a system could be named. The hardest claim was suffrage. Some participants feared that demanding the vote would make the whole convention look foolish and impossible. That fear was not irrational. In 1848, women's suffrage challenged the machinery of political power, not merely the manners of polite society. Frederick Douglass argued in favor of the resolution, and his support mattered because he connected the demand to the broader anti-slavery argument over human rights. According to later accounts, the vote resolution passed after debate. The convention had decided not only to ask for sympathy, but to claim citizenship. Then came signatures. Signing a declaration is quieter than giving a speech, but it can be more dangerous because a name stays on the page after the applause fades. Women and men signed, knowing that neighbors and newspapers could turn their names into jokes. That is exactly what happened. Some newspapers mocked the convention, and ridicule traveled quickly. Yet ridicule also carried the resolutions farther than the chapel walls. Opponents repeated the words while trying to shame them, and in doing so, they helped make the argument visible. The Seneca Falls meeting lasted only 2 days, but its consequences moved outward. A follow-up meeting in Rochester showed that the claims could travel. Reformers copied, debated, and revised the language. Stanton would spend decades building organizations, speeches, and strategies. Mott's example continued to connect conscience with disciplined public action. Douglass kept arguing that rights denied to one group weakened the moral claim of rights for all. The movement that followed did not move in a straight line. It suffered defeats, internal conflicts, racial exclusions, strategic disagreements, and long delays. That uneven aftermath is essential. Seneca Falls was not a perfect birth certificate for equality. Its leadership and memory often centered white middle-class reformers, while black women, working women, native women, immigrant women, and many others faced different barriers and sometimes different priorities. The convention's radical claim did not automatically solve those limits, but the limits do not erase the event. They show why the question opened in 1848 had to be argued again and again. Who counts when a society says rights, citizenship, and equality? The vote did not arrive quickly. Many of the signers did not live to see national women's suffrage in the United States. That delay can make the first resolution look symbolic, but it was more than symbolism. In a small chapel, participants attached the demand for the ballot to education, property, wages, marriage, conscience, and public voice. Because they made those connections in writing and in public, later organizers inherited more than inspiration. They inherited a vocabulary of claims and a place to point back to when opponents said the demand had no history. Seneca Falls matters because it turned waiting into an argument. It took frustrations scattered across homes, churches, schools, offices, and courts and placed them in one public frame. The convention did not finish the struggle, and it did not represent every woman equally, but it opened a door in American political language. After July 19, 1848, the question could no longer be hidden entirely inside custom. If liberty was the nation's promise, then women could ask why they were expected to stand outside the room where that promise was defined.